I was 17 when they laughed me out of the boardroom. My father had brought me to observe his final pitch before retirement. Our family company, Harper Holdings, was on the verge of a massive deal, one that would secure our legacy for decades. But his trusted partners, the very man who once toasted to my birthdays and brought me stuffed animals as a child, turned on him. And on me. "She's the one you want to leave it to?" Danielle scoffed. My fiancé at the time. "Emma doesn't even know the difference between debt and equity." They laughed. All of them. And I didn't defend myself. Not because they were right, but because I knew they'd already decided. The next week, my father was pushed out under a forced buyout. The deal collapsed. The company's value plummeted. And the vultures picked the bones clean. Daniel ended our engagement 2 days later. "It's not personal," he said, lips curled in fake sympathy. "But I need someone who understands this world." He married Madeline Wynne 3 months later. Her father owned a string of shipping firms. Better connections, I suppose. I disappeared from the papers after that. Let them say what they wanted. That I ran off to Europe to escape the shame. That I was too soft, too emotional, too feminine to survive in the world of men. What they didn't know was that I spent the next 7 years studying under the world's toughest investors. I cleaned floors in Shanghai brokerage firms. I translated documents for tech entrepreneurs in Berlin. I apprenticed under an old banker in Zurich who taught me how to break a company apart without getting your hands dirty. Every skill they thought I lacked, I carved into my bones. And slowly, piece by piece, I built a new identity. E. Carter. Genderless. Ageless. Faceless. Just a name with a fortune and a ruthless investment record. I let the world assume E. Carter was a man. The way they spoke in emails and in meetings, I knew they never suspected. He was always sharp, decisive, a mystery with money. No one asked questions because I gave them results. I funded companies on the edge of collapse and made them giants. I pulled money from firms that dared disrespect my terms and watched them burn within months. And finally, once my name was heavy enough to move markets, I returned. Not as Emma Harper, the heiress they discarded. But as the investor they were all desperate to meet. The timing was perfect. Daniel's company, Wintech, was flailing after a series of bad product launches. Rumors were swirling about internal mismanagement. He reached out to E. Carter's office 3 times before I agreed to take a meeting. Of course, he had no idea who I was. All he saw was a chance to save his company. "We just need a bit of runway," he said in the pitch meeting, his voice practiced, polished. "The fundamentals are still strong. A smart investor would see that." I did see it. I saw the arrogance behind his eyes. The way he didn't even look at my assistant when she brought us water. The way he dismissed the junior exec on his team who had an actually useful insight. I recognized the same Daniel from years ago. Except this time I was holding the pen. I agreed to invest. Not too much. Just enough to give him hope. To make him trust me. To invite me deeper into the belly of the beast. I told him I wanted to meet his board. That I would consider a strategic partnership, even a partial acquisition. He lit up like he'd won the lottery. "Carter's in," I heard one of them whisper as I passed through the halls. "This might save us." I smiled beneath my mask. Because they had no idea they were handing me the keys to their kingdom. The same boardroom they once laughed me out of? I'd be sitting at the head of that table soon. And by the time they figured out who I really was, it would be too late. They say power reveals true character. But I think it's anonymity that does it faster. As E. Carter, I watched the men who once mocked me scramble for my approval. They cleaned up their pitch decks, practiced their numbers, even laughed at jokes they didn't understand, just to impress the mystery man behind the money. I wore tailored suits that concealed my shape. I kept my voice low and cold during virtual calls. I rarely appeared in person, but when I did, it was always behind tinted glass or with a stand-in assistant passing notes. I made myself untouchable, unknowable, and they loved it. They called me eccentric. Brilliant. Aggressive in the market but elegant in silence. They compared me to the late titans of Wall Street. One reporter even speculated that I was an exiled royal with a passion for disruption. Let them guess. The mystery gave me power. The distance let me move without suspicion. Meanwhile, I began buying. Not just Wintech, but everything connected to it. The logistics company Daniel used for distribution? I purchased 40% of its shares through one of my holding firms. The design agency that shaped their branding? I acquired it completely, quietly terminating the contract with Wintech 3 months later. They blamed the agency. Never looked further. I bought small shares in their suppliers. Their data centers. Their app developers. Every branch they relied on, I started to own. But I didn't move too fast. That would raise flags. I let them feel safe. Let them believe they were finally in the orbit of a powerful ally. At dinners, they toasted to E. Carter's genius. At meetings, they quoted my emails like gospel. And yet, they still gossiped about Emma Harper behind my back. I heard she's living on some island in disgrace, one exec said at a networking gala I attended in disguise. Total waste of her father's name. I didn't flinch. I just sipped my wine and memorized his face. That company he ran? His biggest client was about to drop him, and that client was mine. Daniel was the easiest to play. He was desperate, reckless, and still thought with his ego. He invited me to an off-the-record retreat in the mountains with other founders. We'll show you the real side of the company, he said. Help you see the vision. I went. Not as E. Carter. But as Emma. Alone, unannounced, elegant. He didn't recognize me. Not with my darker hair, leaner frame, and the quiet confidence I'd learned over the years. You here with someone? He asked, offering me a drink. Just observing, I replied. He flirted. Clumsily. Told me I had the kind of face that belonged in magazine spreads. I smiled and told him I preferred newspapers, especially the business section. He laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. That same night, I made a call to one of my legal teams. I wanted a restructuring offer drafted. One that looked like a lifeline but gave me board control if accepted. I knew Daniel would sign. He was drowning. And I'd baited him with just enough air to make him think he could still win. Within 2 weeks, I had it, majority control of Wintech's voting shares. Not directly, of course. That would have spoiled the surprise. But through shell entities and front trusts, I owned them. I controlled the very room that once threw me out. The board still didn't know. Neither did Daniel. They just thought Carter was finally serious. The masked investor had become their new cornerstone. And I let them believe it. Until I was ready. One of my last moves before revealing myself was a symbolic one. I bought back the old Harper Holdings office building. The one my father had been forced to sell. It was being used as a startup incubator now, but I cleared it. Refurbished every inch. Put the Harper name back on the glass, but smaller this time. I didn't need legacy to speak for me anymore. I had power. And when the city buzzed with rumors that E. Carter would be appearing in person at the next shareholder meeting, they lined up like worshippers before a shrine. Everyone wanted to know who he really was. The man behind the mask. I arrived early, walking through the halls in silence, unnoticed. I passed the portraits on the wall, founders, chairmen, titans. All men. All arrogant. All obsolete. And when I reached the mirrored boardroom doors, I paused. My reflection looked nothing like the girl they once mocked. And everything like the woman who now owned them. I took a breath, opened the doors, and stepped inside. The room fell silent when I walked in. Not because they recognized me. But because they didn't. I had dressed deliberately, black suit, no jewelry, hair pinned back with the precision of a blade. I didn't wear a mask this time. Not a physical one. But the expression on my face was one they didn't know how to read. Daniel stood at the far end, already halfway into his presentation. He stumbled when he saw me, confused for a beat before composing himself. Can we help you? He asked. His tone was clipped, dismissive. I met his eyes and said nothing. Instead, I handed my assistant a folder and nodded. She placed it on the table and slid it forward. What is this? One of the board members asked. An audit? A clarification, I said calmly. Of ownership. The moment the folder was opened, the air shifted. They scanned the pages. First confusion. Then disbelief. And finally, fear. This has to be a mistake, someone muttered. This says Carter Holdings owns 52% of voting shares. That's correct, I replied. Through a series of acquisitions and trust consolidations over the last 18 months. That's impossible, Daniel snapped. We would have known, you didn't look, I interrupted. You never do. You see a name on a file and assume it's not important. You hear a voice and assume it belongs to a man. You read the results but never ask who's behind them. He stared at me. His mind trying to connect dots he hadn't bothered with before. I took a slow breath and let the silence settle. My name, I said clearly, is Emma Harper. And I am E. Carter. Gasps followed. One of the older board members actually dropped his pen. Daniel didn't speak. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I stepped forward, hand steady. 7 years ago, you all stood in this room and laughed when I asked to observe. You called me useless. Emotional. Unfit. You took my father's company, dismantled his legacy, and discarded me like I was nothing. Emma, Daniel began, but I raised a hand. Don't. Not now. My voice was calm but sharp enough to cut through steel. You've spent years pretending to be visionaries. Building nothing. Breaking everything. And now, your future belongs to me. You can't just take over, someone argued weakly. The board has rights, not anymore, I said. As of this morning, 4 of the original board members resigned. They were bought out, at generous rates, I might add. The rest of you are here by courtesy. Not necessity. Another folder slid across the table. This one contained resignation letters and reappointment notices. You'll find your replacements far more competent, I added. And far less interested in old boys' clubs. Daniel looked pale. You tricked us. I beat you, I said. Fairly. Quietly. Legally. The same way you once did to me. The difference is, I didn't burn everything to the ground to feel powerful. I rebuilt. The tension cracked when one of the executives stood up and clapped. Slowly. Ironically. Bravo, he muttered. You've made your point. What now? You dissolve the company? Humiliate us publicly? I stared at him for a long second. No, I said. That would be too easy. I turned to the screen behind me and clicked the remote. A projection lit up, charts, graphs, timelines. You're going to fix what you broke, I said. Under new leadership. Mine. And if you do it well, your reputations might survive. If you don't, I smiled faintly. I'll enjoy watching you fall. The meeting ended with stunned silence. No applause. No resistance. Just the heavy realization that everything had changed. As the others filtered out, Daniel remained frozen in his seat. I walked over slowly, stopping beside him. You really didn't recognize me? I asked. Not once. He looked up. You look different. I am, I said. But you? You're exactly the same. I turned to leave. He called after me. Why didn't you just tell me who you were from the start? I paused at the door. Because you never would have listened. The next day, the headlines exploded. Mystery investor revealed as heiress Emma Harper. Woman behind billion-dollar holdings was disgraced heiress in disguise. The masked mogul who took back her throne. Social media lit up with praise, disbelief, conspiracy theories. Some said I was a feminist icon. Others accused me of deception. But all of them agreed on one thing, I had outplayed the very men who once laughed at me. And I wasn't finished. The media storm should have rattled me. Years ago, it would have. But I had prepared for this moment like a general preparing for war. Every article, every whisper, every viral post was part of the strategy. I didn't need them to love me. I just needed them to see me. Emma Harper, the heiress who rose from shame to supremacy. The woman who made titans kneel. For years, they refused to give me a seat at the table. So I built the table. And now they were asking for a place. My assistant handled the onslaught of press requests. I declined all interviews except one, a business podcast known for long-form financial discussions. I wore the same suit I had worn to the shareholder meeting. No makeup. No theatrics. Just the facts. Why wear a mask? The host asked gently. Why pretend to be a man? I never said I was a man, I replied. The world assumed. And I let it. Wasn't that dishonest? Was it dishonest, I asked, or was it strategic? If I had walked in as myself, they would have seen a scandal. A failure. A woman with a soft voice and a tarnished name. But a shadow with money and power? That, they respected. That, they feared. The episode exploded. Not because I was dramatic. But because I was undeniable. People began referencing my quotes in investment circles. A group of women entrepreneurs launched an incubator in my name. Suddenly, I wasn't just a whisper in boardrooms. I was the voice. Meanwhile, inside Wintech, I was re-engineering everything. The company had been bloated with vanity hires and flashy projects that drained resources. I cut departments in half. Reassigned managers. Installed performance reviews with brutal transparency. The old guard resisted at first. They weren't used to accountability. But I didn't flinch. You're not here because I need you, I reminded them. You're here because I'm giving you a chance to become better. The results were immediate. The quarterly losses slowed. Morale shifted. And the market began to take notice. Analysts who had once dismissed the company as a sinking ship were now calling it a rising empire under sharp leadership. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. My eyes were on something bigger. Daniel had kept in touch, tentatively. Always polite. Always unsure. He sent me a bottle of wine on my birthday. A card that said, "You proved me wrong." I didn't respond. But I didn't throw it away either. Because the truth was, part of me wanted him to see everything. To feel it. To understand what he lost, not just the woman he abandoned, but the power he could have stood beside. One night, I hosted a private event at the newly renovated Harper Tower. Just 50 guests. Industry leaders. Politicians. Journalists. And Daniel. I watched him arrive in a suit slightly too tight and a smile slightly too forced. He was trying to impress again. Just like he did when we were young. I let him come to me. "You've changed," he said quietly. "You haven't," I replied. He looked wounded, but he recovered quickly. "You always had this in you." I didn't see it." "You didn't want to," I said. "You wanted someone who would smile, nod, and stay quiet while you made decisions." "I was wrong," he admitted. "And I'm sorry." I tilted my head. "Do you want forgiveness, Daniel?" He paused. "I want to know if there's a place for me in this new world you've built." I stared at him for a long time. Then I smiled, not cruelly, but knowingly. "There's a place for everyone. But not all places are beside me." He opened his mouth. Closed it. And then nodded. He understood. That was enough. I turned away, greeted another guest, and let him fade into the crowd. The old me might have wept. The new me simply moved forward. Because revenge isn't just about punishment. It's about proving that you were always more than they allowed you to be. That you were never the weak one. That silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. I stood at the top of the tower that bore my name and watched the city below. The same city that once mocked me. The same skyline that once turned its back. Now it glowed with possibility. And every light was mine. The weeks after the reveal were a blur of meetings, restructurings, and strategic announcements. Every corner of the industry watched as Wintech transformed under my direction. Investors who had once refused to take my calls now begged for meetings. The Harper name was no longer spoken with pity, it was associated with precision, power, and the kind of brilliance that could only come from surviving betrayal. But I hadn't forgotten. Not the board members who laughed. Not the executives who cast me aside. Not the so-called friends who faded the moment I lost status. They all watched me now, hoping I'd forget. Hoping I'd be gracious. That wasn't my plan. My plan was dominance. Quiet. Icy. Irrefutable. I made my next move silently, acquiring controlling shares of Clarion Media, the same conglomerate that had run hit pieces on my family during the scandal years ago. They had painted my father as unstable. Me as a spoiled, incompetent child. Those articles had ruined us. So I bought the company. And in my first executive decision, I fired the editorial team who greenlit those headlines. The press called it poetic. I called it overdue. I didn't do interviews. I didn't gloat. I let action speak for me. In the background, I was consolidating another move, this one more personal. Madeline Wynne, Daniel's wife, had launched a side fashion label with backing from her father. It was sleek, overpriced, and hemorrhaging cash. I watched it closely. Waited until they were desperate for a silent partner to keep the lights on. They approached Carter Holdings for a private round. My legal team disguised the offer under a temporary shell firm. I gave them a generous but strict contract, complete operational control in exchange for full brand ownership within 2 years. Madeline signed. Her smile was bright. Her voice confident. She thought she had a savior. She didn't recognize me either. I never needed her to. 6 months later, the brand was stripped, rebranded, and relaunched under the Harper name. Overnight, her name disappeared from the website, her designs archived without ceremony. I received a handwritten note from her in pale pink ink, "You win." I never stood a chance, did I? I didn't respond. Because she wasn't my target. She was collateral. Daniel was the one I wanted to watch unravel. And I knew just how to do it. Wintech still bore his name, even if I held the reins. And he clung to that illusion, that he was still relevant, still essential. So I gave him rope. Let him host one final press conference, pitching an expansion strategy he'd outlined on his own. I let him feel in control. Then I didn't show up. Neither did any board members. The cameras rolled, the press asked brutal questions, and Daniel fumbled through it alone. "Where's Emma Harper?" they asked. "Did she approve these numbers? Is it true Carter Holdings is shifting funding to other branches?" The next morning, I made it official. A new CEO was appointed. Daniel's access was revoked. His office was cleared before lunch. And when the headlines ran with the story, I issued a single statement: leadership requires clarity, not ego. I didn't watch his reaction. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't about humiliation. It was about closure. He had taken everything from me. And now, I had taken it back. Not just the name. Not just the buildings or the companies. I had taken the narrative. I controlled the version of the story the world would remember. Emma Harper, once discarded, now helmed an empire built on resilience and ruthless intelligence. I didn't become the woman they wanted me to be. I became the one they couldn't stop. And as I looked at the skyline from the corner office I reclaimed, I knew this was only the beginning. I didn't celebrate Daniel's fall. I marked it. Quietly. Like closing a chapter in a book I'd memorized but no longer needed to reread. With him gone, the company stabilized faster than anyone expected. The new CEO I appointed, a woman named Lila Grayson, was sharp, methodical, and fiercely loyal. She reminded me of myself, except she'd never had to wear a mask to be respected. That was the world I was helping shape now. One where power didn't require pretense. Where skill spoke louder than gender or legacy. I stepped back from daily operations and began focusing on acquisitions again. But this time, I chose them differently. I didn't chase flashy numbers or headlines. I found the quiet builders. The overlooked talents. The women and men who had been passed over, underestimated, dismissed. And I backed them. One of them was a young coder from a small town who had developed a groundbreaking logistics algorithm. Another was a single mother running a sustainable materials company out of her garage. No press releases. No interviews. Just funding, mentorship, and the kind of opportunities one had to fight tooth and nail for. My empire grew faster than anyone predicted. Not just in size, but in influence. People started calling it the quiet rain. A network of companies, leaders, and innovations that seemed to bloom wherever I turned my attention. And at the center of it was me. Emma Harper. No longer the heiress they left behind. But the architect of something far bigger. Of course, the same people who once mocked me tried to rewrite history. Suddenly, old classmates claimed they always believed in me. Former colleagues sent notes dripping with flattery. Even distant family members, the ones who hadn't returned a single call when the scandal broke, reached out with invitations and empty words. I ignored most of them. But I made one exception. Mr. Langston, my father's oldest friend and former partner. He had gone silent after the buyout, choosing to retire early rather than stay in the company under Daniel's regime. I invited him to dinner. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes still had the same warmth. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly after dessert. I nodded. "I hope so." "And you?" he asked. "Are you proud?" That question stayed with me long after he left. I had everything I wanted: power, control, respect. But was I proud? I walked through Harper Tower that night, alone, tracing my fingers along the walls I once dreamed of reclaiming. The office lights glowed softly. My portrait hung beside my father's now. And below it, a plaque that read, "Rebuilt, reimagined, relentless." I smiled. Not because I needed validation. But because I finally understood that revenge was never the end goal. It was just the beginning. I didn't want to destroy what they had built. I wanted to build better. Stronger. Smarter. I had spent years proving them wrong. Now, I wanted to prove myself right. So I founded a scholarship in my father's name, for women entering business programs. I launched an initiative to fund female-led startups in developing markets. I partnered with international schools to teach negotiation and finance to girls as young as 10. And I never once put my name in bold letters. Because power, true power, didn't need to shout. It just needed to work. Quietly. Relentlessly. Like I did. Daniel tried once more to contact me. A letter, handwritten, left at reception. He apologized again. Talked about regret, about reflection. About how he saw everything differently now. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Some people grow when they lose. Others just shrink further. And Daniel? He was still searching for the pedestal he thought he deserved. I was done with pedestals. I was too busy building an empire. I used to think revenge would feel like fire, hot, sharp, searing. But standing at the summit of everything I'd built, I realized it wasn't fire that had fueled me. It was silence. Strategy. Precision. The slow, surgical reclamation of power. I didn't need to scream or burn bridges. I simply bought the land the bridges were built on, and rewrote the map. I hadn't meant to become a symbol. But people were watching. Girls writing my name in notebooks. Young professionals quoting my early strategy memos like scripture. I didn't ask for the spotlight. But I had earned it. And if I could turn it into something useful, I would. So I hosted a closed-door summit in the same city where they once held lavish parties and kept me off the guest list. Except this time, the guest list belonged to me. The Harper Women's Initiative launched with a dozen key partners, venture firms, tech CEOs, nonprofit leaders. All people who had once been ignored, doubted, or dismissed. I watched them shake hands across the table, forge new alliances, and in doing so, rewrite the rules. And while they built the future, I made one final move in the past. Harper Holdings had been reduced to nothing more than a name on a plaque after the buyout. Its last remaining asset, a small equity stake in a dormant infrastructure firm, was up for public auction. I bought it for sentiment, not strategy. But sentiment, I learned, could be powerful when placed correctly. I revived the brand. Not as a holding company, but as a foundation. One that funded innovation in overlooked sectors, water access, transportation equity, green logistics. Things no one wanted to touch because they weren't glamorous. I didn't need glamour. I needed legacy. The kind that couldn't be undone with a headline or a betrayal. One morning, while reviewing final approvals for the foundation's launch, I received a message flagged urgent. It was from a former assistant of my father's. Attached was a voicemail. Buried in an old account I hadn't accessed in years. His voice crackled through the audio. Emma, if they push me out, don't fight them yet. Watch. Learn. Build quietly. And when the time is right, take it all back. And take it further than I ever could. I listened to it twice. Then I walked to the rooftop of Harper Tower and played it once more under the open sky. I closed my eyes and let the moment settle, not in sadness, but in triumph. He had known. He had trusted me. Even when the world didn't. And I had done exactly what he asked. I had taken it all back. And more. At the next annual gala, I took the stage for the first time since the reveal. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed. But I stood still, calm. They called me emotional, I began. Said I didn't have the instincts. That I wasn't made for this world. And maybe they were right. I wasn't made for their world. I was made to build a new one. I paused. We don't have to fit in to take control. We don't have to scream to be heard. And we don't have to ask for permission to lead. We just have to show up, build relentlessly, and own what they told us we couldn't. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. But I wasn't looking for applause. I was looking at the future. At every girl in that room who had been underestimated. Every founder who had been told she was too soft, too much, too little. They weren't here for revenge. They were here for the next chapter. Just like I was. Because I hadn't worn the mask to hide. I'd worn it to survive. But now? Now, I didn't need it anymore. The final chapter wasn't written in headlines or takeovers. It unfolded in quieter ways. In the sound of a new founder's pitch being taken seriously because she mentioned she'd studied my portfolio. In the emails I received from women who had secured funding for the first time, finally treated as more than risks. In the old men who used to laugh at me now asking to collaborate. And being told, politely, that their methods were no longer relevant. My empire no longer needed defending. It was rooted too deep, spread too wide. And yet I stayed sharp. Not out of fear. But because power demands responsibility. The mask had given me access. But my name gave me impact. And I would never trade that again. I had been the faceless investor. The forgotten heiress. The woman in the room no one believed mattered. Now I was something far simpler. Unignorable. My final act of closure came during an invitation-only investor roundtable. Not televised. No press. Just decision-makers from the most powerful firms in the country. And Daniel. I hadn't seen him in over a year. He looked older. Worn. Not ruined, but dimmed. He shook my hand. Congratulations, he said. You really did it. I nodded. I did. Did you ever think about letting it go? He asked. About, just starting over without looking back? I did start over, I said. But I didn't look back to hold a grudge. I looked back to learn. To understand the shape of what I was building. He looked down at the table. I used to think control was about being loudest. Smartest. First. You taught me it's about being inevitable. It wasn't an apology. But it was close enough. And I didn't need more. That night, I walked through the city in heels that echoed down the same streets where I once felt invisible. People glanced but didn't stop me. I didn't need recognition. I had results. The skyline shimmered with lights from buildings I had touched. Campaigns I had funded. Startups I had rescued. Companies that now bore names I helped shape. And somewhere, deep inside all that glass and steel, were the ghosts of the girl I used to be. The one who once begged Daniel to believe in her. The one who wept in silence when her family was betrayed. The one who watched her name turn to ash. I didn't pity her. I thanked her. She had walked through fire so I could rise. She had survived the silence so I could command the room. She had worn the mask so I could take it off. And now? Now I was done hiding. The mask had served its purpose. Emma Harper no longer needed to be feared, pitted, or proven. She was known. Respected. Unstoppable. And the world they tried to keep from me? I owned it. Every company. Every contract. Every name that once rolled their eyes when I entered the room. They no longer saw a girl pretending to belong. They saw the woman who made them beg to stay. I was the investor in the mask. The heiress they left behind. And by the time they realized what I had become, I already owned everything they built. Including the future.